Peace, and welcome to another episode of the Quranic Remedies, where we spend about 20 minutes exploring a page from the Quran together and seeing how we can apply the verses to our lives. And hopefully, with God's permission, it helps us heal our brain, body, mind, and soul. So today we'll be reading from chapter 2, the cow, from verses 187 to 190. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. I seek refuge to God from the accursed devil. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of God, the merciful, the gracious. أحل لكم ليلة الصيام الرفث إلى نسائكم هن لباس لكم وأنتم لباس لهن علم الله إنكم كنتم تختانون أنفسكم فتاب عليكم وعفى عنكم فالآن باشروهن وابتغوا ما كتب الله لكم وكلوا واشربوا حتى يتبين لكم الخيط الأبيض من الخيط الأسود من الفجر ثم أتموا الصيام إلى الليل ولا تباشروهن وأنتم عاكفون في المساجد تلك حدود الله فلا تقربوها كذلك يبين الله آياته للناس لعلهم يتقون. Lawful for you is the night of the abstinences to lust after your wives. They are a cover for you and you are a covering for them. God knows that you had been cheating yourselves, so He has forgiven you and has pardoned you. So copulate with them now and seek what God has decreed for you. And eat and drink until the whitish thread becomes clear to you from the blackish thread of dawn. Then conclude the abstinence at night, but do not copulate with them while you are abiding in the mosques. These are the limits of God, so do not approach them. God thus clarify His verses to the people, perhaps they will become pious. ولا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل وتدولوا بها إلى الحكام لتأكلوا فريقا من أموال الناس بالإثم وأنتم تعلمون. And do not consume your assets among yourselves with falsehood by presenting it to the judges in order to consume a portion of the people's wealth in sin, while you know. يسألونك عن الأهلة قل هي مواقيت للناس والحج وليس البر بأن تأتوا البيوت من ظهورها ولكن البر من اتقى وأوتوا البيوت من أبوابها واتقوا الله لعلكم تفلحون. They ask you about the crescents. Say, there are timings for the people on the pilgrimage, and it is not righteousness to enter houses from the backs, but righteous is one who reverence and enters houses through their doors. So beware of God, perhaps you will succeed. وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. And fight those who fight you in the way of God, but do not aggress. Indeed, God does not like the aggressors. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God the Great said the truth. Now these verses are a carry on from the verses in regards to fasting, right? So here we are now, God is laying for us the requirements on how to complete the fast and what we need to fast from. Obviously, it's from food and water, and also with engaging in sexual activities with our wives. Now, in my opinion, and again, this is how I understand the Quran, this is a verse alluding to the concept of abrogation. So it seems like there was one point when fasting was prescribed to the believers where God said that you cannot copulate with your husbands and wives during the nights of fasting, and that you were supposed to completely fast the whole month from having sexual activities. But then God later clarifies that He kind of allowed you to have it at night, and He also knew that during the times when there was a prohibition that you were kind of lying to yourself, that you were cheating yourself. Because the verses here, it's a rafs where Shuaiba opted to translate it to lust. I understand lust is a sin. Yes, lusting is a form of sin, but there's also a way where you are talking in a way to your wife or your spouse in a way where it's enticing them to engage in set activities. So it's the way that you're approaching the talk, it's of a sexual nature that is alluding to that you're wanting to have certain relationships with your spouses. But this is not allowed during your fasting. So you to sit there and to sexualize people in your mind, or to try to engage people in a way where you're having innuendos so that the person can feel almost lustful in that moment, this is actually completely forbidden. And God goes at the end of the verse to clarify that this is completely not allowed while you are residing in the mosque, or you are staying in the mosques or the places of worship that is a time to remember God. You cannot engage your wives and spouses in a way where it's alluding of a sexual nature. So I find a lot of people, unfortunately, in the haram and the Prophet's mosque, when they're walking with their spouse, they're like to hold their hand or to hold their arms. And sometimes they're talking in a way where it shows clearly that they're being flirting with each other, being flirtatious with each other. And this is a complete no-no, because God is saying these are the limits of God. Do not approach them. You're supposed to be in a state of purity in that moment when you're with God and when you're fasting. So these thoughts of a sexual nature is actually kind of hindering that purity in that moment of clarity that you should be in. So you shouldn't engage in activities that's going to increase your sexual appetite during your fasting and when you're sitting in the mosque. Now, something that's interesting here, God says to us in the verse that now you're allowed to engage them and you can seek what God has decreed for you. Seeking what God has decreed for you, from what I understand in this verse, is children. Is the fact that you already have your wife that's already been decreed for you. But when you're having these intimate moments with your spouses, you might get a child. And that's something that God has decreed for you. Because God often talks in the Quran about your wealth and your children. Your wealth and your children. God then in chapter 4, where we get there, he kind of prioritizes taking orphans and taking care of orphans. And if you can't take care of orphans, then the next thing that you should focus on is having 2, 3, 4 wives, or one if you can't handle having multiple wives. Because that way you get to have many children. That is a blessing from God to have children. Children are a way for you to increase yourself after you pass away if your kids are righteous. God says in a verse that those that come with God on the day of judgment, your money and your kids will not avail you, except those that came with a pure heart, came to their Lord with a pure heart. So there are things that where you are putting into the world, like opening a school or having a good child, it benefits you after you're done. So that's why having multiple children and focusing on a wealth to build for your hereafter is important. Now, there is something that's also beautiful here in this verse. God says that we are a clothing or a covering for our wives, and for our wives, we are clothing for them, and they are clothing for us. It's something that it's very poetic in nature. And I'm not saying the Quran is poetic, but what I'm trying to say is that it's painting an image for you to understand. We can take it as a literal way instead of having to go into a way to understand the literal beauty behind it, or the literature and the way that it's being presented to you and how beautiful it is. Because how amazing it is when you go to your house after a long day of work, you get in bed and you cover yourself in those sheets, especially if it's cold or if it's cold outside. That warmth that your bed gives you, that little comfort, that house that we live in. So when we are a covering to our wives and they're a covering for us, it's supposed to be somebody that we can fully trust, that we are capable of getting covered by them while we're covering them and making sure that they're okay. They're making sure that we're okay as well. So it's an amazing relationship that God has bestowed upon us as human beings, so that we can understand the feelings of love and being wanted and covering and helping somebody. But yet we're able to deduce and to understand on where those limits stop. So God is telling us it's, one, it shouldn't be of a sexual nature, but it does exist. And two, that you have obligations that are more important than your wife or more important than your husband. And those obligations are towards God. You need to be able to stop engaging with them and prioritizing God over everything that they're going to need or require, because at the end of the day, God is feeding you and feeding them. But now, there is a certain conversation that people ask in regards to when to stop the fasting. Starting the fasting is quite clear, that as soon as you see the thread of the white light, the whitish light of the dawn and the whitish from the blackish light, that's when you start to the blackish thread. That's when you start to fast. Now, you as a believer, you should take the time to actually go investigate to see how that feels and how that looks. That brings you closer to God, because nowadays we're just relying on technology. I personally did go out in a field one time, or actually on a beach, where there isn't any much light pollution. I drove outside of the city and I sat and witnessed that transformation. And during the dawn, I realized it was about 15 degrees when the sun starts to kind of show, that white light starts to shine, and that's when I started to opt to fast. Now, the interesting part here is that God did not say day, right? He said Fajr. Because God did clearly say that he merges the day and the night. And then from the night, he merges the day. So there's an overlap where the day and the night both exist at the same time. This would be known during Fajr, and this would be known during sunset, during the time of sunset. Now, when we're talking about the night, God says, and complete the fasting till the night. When the sun is setting and the sun has completely set, technically we have yet to start night. The night is starting, as God says in chapter 36, is that we have stripped the day from the night. So the stripping of the day is part of the night, because God says from the night, which now God has labeled that time night, we are stripping the day from it. Okay, so that is obviously when the two are merged, but God prioritized by calling it night. So when you see just a little bit of the black, or the kind of the black thread appearing after the sun has set, that is technically when the night has begun. That is when I believe one of the twilights have started and you are able to eat. It's not about the complete darkness of the night, because at that point God said غَسَقُ اللَّيْلِ. So that is a certain time of the night. He didn't say al-ghasaq al-layl. So he's not defining or telling how the night is looking. Rather, he's telling you a time of the night. But so we're allowed to eat and engage with our wives and drink water, drink when the night begins to appear, which is just a little bit after sunset. This is my understanding. I understand some people have different approaches, but at the end of the day, you're going to be responsible for what you truly have been presenting to yourself and to God. Now, the next verse, as God is saying, do not consume your money between each other in falsehood. Do not sit and bribe judges so that you would still be able to oppress other people, or so that you could run businesses where you're stealing other people's money. It's funny that now in high-level crimes and ways people play around with taxes and play around with funds and whatnot, what they do is they pay off the people who are supposed to be giving us justice, the people who are supposed to be governing us, the people who are supposed to make sure that the laws are being put forth and that they're being maintained and they're being followed. Yet we find corruption almost everywhere. There isn't a country where corruption isn't found in it. Yes, there are countries in the world where corruption is not as severe as it is in the Middle East, the land of the Muslims, so-called Muslims. Or yet in the West nowadays, where they're saying it's the land of the freedom and justice and human rights, you could find corruption now starting to being something that's rampant. Now God is talking about somewhat children in the beginning, about engaging with your wives, and now he went back and started talking about your wealth again. But you have rights over your wealth. I mean, you shouldn't have your wealth taken away from you in a way that is unjust, because it is your right for you to be building for your hereafter. If someone is sitting there to play with you with his words, or to hustle you, or to sell you something that is not right, or it's broken, or for them just to get money from you, then that person obviously just wants this world. Like, that money is so important to him, and in my way of approaching it, sometimes I just let him have it, because I understand that it's going to cost them a lot on the day of judgment. But you also have to be smart and wise with your money. You can't just give money to everybody, and you can't just give money to anybody who's asking you, and you can't sit and try to engage in any activity that's going to make you money just because someone promised you so. A lot of things that are coming to you nowadays in regards to crypto coins to invest in, or some marketing scheme that would work if you become an influencer and start selling things, or selling books that really do not amount to anything. The only thing that you did was actually sell an empty book, and that's how you're making your money. Those are things that are stealing from people, that you're taking money from people in a way that is not good for you. God has permitted us to trade so that we could become better as society. If I have a tons of grain, like I'm a society where in my land it's easy to grow grains, and somewhere else that they have a society where it's easy for them to make textiles. But in my land, in my area, it is not easy for me to make textile. So for both of us, and it's not easy for them to have grains, so for both of us to increase in this world and to make our lives easier and comfortable by the grace of God, this is when trade is permissible. This is when trade is extremely helpful. This is when trade helps forward society. But for me to sit here and to give you grain on a loan where there's going to be interest and you're going to pay me back in a certain way, and that I'm going to sell you 2/3 of a grain, but you're going to get one for free, but you have to read the little text, the legal text, for you to see how it falls. And if you break one of the conditions, then the terms and conditions have been broken, and therefore I don't have to fulfill my right to you. But it's because you didn't read it, so I banked on your ignorance and I got it. I got your money in a way that I shouldn't have got. And then if you run to the judges, I just pay the money to the judges, and now you're in trouble, not me. This is not a world that is healthy. That is not a world where we're about society and humanity and us being close together with guidance of God, with awareness of God. Because on the day of judgment, we can't play lawyer with God. I can't go to someone, well, yeah, I did write in the contract that he's going to give me his house, but I didn't say to him, and then he signed it without reading the contract, so it's his fault. He's the one who did not look into the contract the way he did. And yes, I did word it funny so that he didn't understand that, his asset meant his house where he thought it was his business. But he did sign it, so it's mine. You can't do that on the day of judgment, because the person is going to reveal exactly what he understood and what you understood. So there's nothing going to be hidden. Now, obviously, as the Quran is being revealed, from what I understand, there are times where people had a question. People would be saying something or thinking something in their head. And I truly believe this, especially in a different verse that we can get to. I believe in chapter 73 or 74, Al-Muddathir. But it seems like sometimes when people are having an idea or questioning something, God is answering them in the Quran as it's being revealed. Real-time answers as the Prophet is reciting the Quran. A good example is one of the verses says, well, do not ask about things that you know would harm you as the Quran is being recited. Other people have asked about it and then they've denied it and kind of did what they weren't supposed to do. So you have to be careful, obviously, when the Quran is being recited on the questions that you're having. I don't know if you guys ever experienced this. I personally experienced this, where I'm going through something during my day and I'm worried about this confusion, this small fitna that I'm going under while I'm in the middle of the prayer. And then I would have an idea. And then if someone is reciting the Quran is literally answering what I'm going through. So it scares you, and you start to listen and you start to apply the verse exactly to the situation that you're in. And then obviously at that point you've been guided. And if you deny what just happened to you, then you're in trouble. And if you go through with what you've been told in that moment, then at that point you obeyed the messenger. You obeyed God and his messenger. Now, this actually occurs with, unfortunately, I'm not going to get too much into this. This occurs with people who listen to music a lot. Sometimes they think that the music is speaking to them specifically. But the source of the people who are giving said music are not people who are attached to God. This is at this point the devil decorating your deeds. This is at this point you being misguided and you just making up scenarios in your head, and the devil is pushing you through. Because the words originally that answered you are not from God. And God told you, do not obey the corruptors, do not obey the liars, do not obey the hypocrites, do not obey the idolaters and whatnot. And a lot of the music nowadays is garbage music. So it's not things that you should be getting your information from, or you getting guidance from it, especially from the stuff that they're presenting nowadays. So one of the questions that was asked is about the crescents. Why do we have these phases that are happening in the moon? And the simple answer is just for you to understand how time works. Because time is something that is very essential for the human. We are finite creatures. We have a start time, we have an end time, we have an expiry date, and then from there's another time where we get to live forever, which we cannot understand. Because we are finite creatures. We need to understand how something will end or how something will go, and it's very difficult for us to grasp infinity. And on the day of judgment, after we get our judgment, and may God put us all in his mercy, I mean the people who are watching, except those that want to deny our Lord, may God put us in his mercy, we get to live forever. So there is no more end, there's no more expiry. That's something that's very difficult to grasp, and that's a talking point that a lot of people have in regards to hell. Well, it's not fair for the person to go to hell forever. Yeah, it's definitely fair, because that's the path you chose forever. When you've been warned multiple times that you're going to have regrets. Something that you hate as a human being is to be in regret, to feel sad that you missed out on something. Well, that's what the Quran's been warning you the whole time. People will express words of regret on the Day of Judgment. You don't want to be in that position. So do what you have to do. Be a good human being. It's not difficult. You just have to rely on God. You have to completely see what is going to be beneficial for you and humanity, and you follow what's real. So now they're asking in regards to the timings, the crescents, which is showing us our time and how history has to move forward and how to measure things using timing, which God has given us a perfect system, a very well measured system, which is the sun and the moon. And it's also a way for us to understand when the pilgrimage is going to come. So the thing that is signifying to us the pilgrimage is, again, the moon. Just like how the thing that's signifying to us when Ramadan starts is the moon. So watching the moon and seeing the crescent, which is signifying the start of the month, is something that is sacred, something that's very important, which people nowadays are just chalking it up and giving it to some vile governments and just trusting their words, when even the sciences are proving that when they're saying that they saw the moon, it's an impossibility for the human eye to see the moon. Yet they say, yeah, we did, and here's a picture, and it's all doctored just so that they would get their way, either politically or so that they just save money because of how their society functions. It's something that's very sad, because they no longer reverence or are pious or aware of what God is. They think they're just, oh, it's okay, God will forgive us. It's fine that we're doing Ramadan a day late, or it's fine if Ramadan is a day early. It's okay to say that now is the season for Hajj when it isn't the season for Hajj. To them, it's okay. It's just a day. It's not a problem. But it's actually costing them a lot of pain on the Day of Judgment, because they're just prioritizing things that are not worthy of being prioritized in that moment. And then God also carries on, after talking about the crescents, about houses and the importance of actually being upfront. You coming behind people's houses is going to cause problems in the fact that if someone's witnessing you, they're going to think that you're up to no good. If someone is showing up to my house in the back door, a lot of people will assume later that this person is probably up to no good, because he does not want to show himself in a way that's apparent and publicly to everybody. Could be a thief, could be a deal that shouldn't be done, could be sneaking in to see a girl, could be all sorts of things that people usually get, which is usually the case. When people show up at back doors, it's not because they feel welcomed in that moment. Of course, there's some people that you say, hey man, just come to the back door, it's easier in that moment. That's different, you have a permission. But if you're approaching somebody's house, you should never, ever approach the back door, because it's more pious for you and you're more aware of God and you're more aware of your surrounding by going to the front door. You putting yourself in a position where you're causing other people to purposely get negative thoughts and impure thoughts and negative assumptions, you're actually harming them on the Day of Judgment. That's something that's going to be accounted for. God says, there's verses where do not allow us to be a test for the disbelievers, i.e. the disbelievers sitting there killing us and kicking our butts because of our faith. That's us being a test to the disbelievers. And the other thing is me constantly talking about God and them pushing themselves further in hell. And now I am also being a test to them. So these are concepts where you need to be aware and have some wisdom. And this is a very good example. So come in the front of the house, knock on the front of the house, so that you are presentable to the world, where you're not scared and you're not shy, and you don't need to find strategies and ways for you to hide in the darkness, for you to sit in the gray zone or the black zone just because you don't want to reveal who you are. Don't hide your riches, don't hide yourself, be presentable as God said. So for you to, this is something that's later that we're also going to discuss, is that some people like to hide their riches and how much they have because they think that's better for them. In fact, God is saying that those are the people who are concealing what God has given them. They're in big trouble. And after we talk about what God has provided for us, God gives us something that is also a foreshadowing, i.e. the pilgrimage, and then to fight. God is telling us to fight in His way. That is the only time that where it's permissible to fight. Nowadays, unfortunately, people who are fighting, they're fighting in the sake of their country. They're fighting in the sake of their king or the president or their ruler. They're fighting in the sake of NATO or the sake of so-called Western democracy. And others, who are also Muslims, they're fighting for the sake of the purse. What I mean by the purse is MMA, boxing, for money. They're just doing it to become the champion of the world. When is the time going to come where people realize what it means to fight in the sake of God? Is humanity suffering? Yes. In the hands of who? Tyrants. By whom? By the command of their devil. So what do? We fight back as a community. This includes Christians, Jews, and Muslims, and Sunnis and Shias who truly understand what it means to be a believer in God. That the society is very dependent on the faith of God. Because when that gets stripped away, we're just going to become hedonistic, crazy, stupid, abusive creatures. Because that's our only limiter is God. So if you're not going to fight in the way of God, then we've already lost. We have a clear enemy that enemy is going to stay till the day of judgment. We're not going to convince him that we're better than him. We're not going to be able to change his understanding of the world. And he has a promise that he's going to hell. And anyone who follows him is going with him. Clearly, that's the devil. So that's a war or a fight that we're always going to engage in. But if we were strong enough and wise enough, we could put that devil in a jail cell. We could lock that devil up in a way where it's very difficult for him to affect us. And then we have conquered ourselves and conquered the world in the name of God. And the only thing that's going to allow us to put that devil in jail is to not let thoughts like greed or power or lust or whatever worldly desires get over us. That's the only way we keep that little piece of poop in jail, locked up. Now, God also says, do not transgress. Yes, fighting is important, but don't be the person that takes the first shot. Taking the first shot is not something that should ever be done. So there's so many factors that come to fighting. But with the Muslim, a lot of those factors and natural factors is irrelevant. Because us as a small group, without having that technology, without having that mass of people, just because of our faith and our will to survive in the name of God, we will succeed. Because it's a promise from God. And if we're not succeeding and we're losing constantly, then we're doing something that is not right. Because the promise of God is not being fulfilled on us. In fact, it seems like it's the opposite. That we're on the other end of the promise. That we're constantly losing. That we're constantly getting divided. That we're constantly under these tyrants. It kind of sounds like a place we know that's very, very not so Muslim, yet they call themselves Muslims. The Middle East, unfortunately. Because the reason why they are where they are is because simply they've stopped fighting. You should always fight. You should fight mentally. You should fight physically. You should fight spiritually. The fight is constantly going. And this is the only way that you take yourself out of depression if you are depressed. This is the only way that you give yourself a true understanding of what we are. That we're not dispensable, but we're willing to expense ourselves in the name of God at any moment. Are you willing? Are you willing to leave your online world, your family, your business, your cars, your whatever you have? Are you willing to just pick up and go and fight? Well, we'll see, because it might come to your door sooner or later. With that said, Assalamu alaikum, and we'll see you around.